All right, today we're cracking open the ultimate toolkit of one of the most powerful institutions in India, the judiciary. We're going to explore a set of tools so potent they can actually shape laws, protect our rights, and even hold the entire government accountable. So let's get right into it.
So let's start with a big one. In a democracy, who really has the final say? Is it Parliament, the elected body that literally creates the laws? Or is it the Supreme Court, the institution that's the final interpreter of the Constitution? This fundamental tension, this push and pull, that's exactly where our story begins.
So to really get our heads around this, we're going to look at the judiciary's ever-expanding toolkit. First up, we'll look at the absolute foundation, judicial review. Then we'll see how the court gets a little more proactive with something called judicial activism. After that, we'll uncover a truly revolutionary tool for the people, public interest litigation. And finally, we'll step back and look at the delicate balance of power all of this creates. Okay, let's start with the judiciary's original and honestly, its most fundamental power. You can think of this as the master key in the entire toolkit, judicial review.
So what is it really? Well, simply put, judicial review is the power of a court to look at any law or any government action and say, nope, this violates the Constitution, so it's void. And here's a fun fact. The term judicial review isn't actually written anywhere in the Indian Constitution. The whole idea was inspired by a landmark American case, Marbury v. Madison, and its authority comes from a few different articles within the Constitution.
And why is this so crucial? Well, because it basically allows the judiciary to act as an umpire in the game of governance. It makes sure the Constitution stays the supreme law of the land, it keeps the power balanced between the central government and the states, and maybe most importantly, it protects the fundamental rights of every single one of us.
But what happens when the players on the field try to change the rules of the game to benefit themselves? Back in the 1950s, Parliament needed to pass some major land reform laws, but they were worried the courts would strike them down. So they created a constitutional loophole, the Ninth Schedule. This was basically a legal black hole. Any law they dropped inside it was suddenly immune from judicial review. This, as you can imagine, led to a massive constitutional showdown. It starts in 1951 when the Ninth Schedule is created. But then, in 1973, in the legendary Kesavananda Bharti case, the Supreme Court fought back. It established what's called the Basic Structure Doctrine, which says there are certain core features of the Constitution that even Parliament can never change. And crucially, it set a deadline. Any law put into that black hole after April 24, 1973, was now fair game for the court to review. And this wasn't just some minor academic issue. Just look at this number. The Ninth Schedule started with only 13 laws. Today, there are 282. That just goes to show you how tempting that black hole was for governments and exactly why the Supreme Court's intervention was so absolutely critical. The Supreme Court's final word on the matter was crystal clear. Judicial review itself is part of the Constitution's basic structure. It's a power that's not up for negotiation. It can't be amended. It can't be taken away. The umpire basically made it clear that they could never, ever be kicked off the field.
But, the judiciary doesn't just review what others have already done. Sometimes it takes a much more proactive role. And that brings us to our next tool, one that is both celebrated and, pretty controversial. Judicial activism.
So judicial activism is basically when the court shifts from being that passive umpire to more of an active player coach. It's when judges take a really proactive role, especially when they feel that the government just isn't doing its job to protect citizens' rights or deliver justice.
Now, the opposite of activism is something called restraint. An activist judge believes their role is to mold the law to meet society's changing needs. But a judge who practices restraint believes their job is only to interpret the law exactly as it's written and leave all the lawmaking to the elected parliament. So you see the difference? One prioritizes justice and filling gaps, while the other prioritizes the strict separation of powers.
A perfect example of activism in action is the issue of workplace sexual harassment. For years, India had no specific law to address this. It was a massive legislative vacuum. So in the landmark Vishaka case, the Supreme Court stepped in. It didn't just interpret some old law, it effectively created a new one. It laid down a detailed set of rules called the Vishaka Guidelines that became legally binding across the entire country until Parliament finally got around to passing a formal act years later.
And now for the final and I think maybe the most revolutionary tool in the entire kit. This one didn't just empower the court, it empowered every single citizen of India. I'm talking about public interest litigation, or PIL.
To understand why PIL was such a game-changer, you have to know the old rule. It was called locus standi. It's a Latin term, but it basically means you needed to have a personal stake in a case to bring it to court. If your own rights weren't directly violated, you simply couldn't file a lawsuit. You could only fight for yourself, period.
But what about all the people who couldn't fight for themselves? In the late 1970s, a newspaper exposed a truly horrifying reality. 40,000 under-trial prisoners were just languishing in Bihar's jails. Many of them had been there for longer than their maximum possible sentence. They were poor, they were forgotten, and they had absolutely no way to approach the courts.
That's when a lawyer named Kapila Hingorani read that newspaper article. Now, she didn't have locus standi. None of these prisoners were her clients, but she filed a petition in the Supreme Court on their behalf anyway, and the court, it listened. This single act is why she's now known as the mother of PIL.
And that one case gave birth to public interest litigation. The court basically threw that old rigid rule of locus standi out the window. Now, any citizen could go to court on behalf of those who couldn't. It was nothing short of a revolution in access to justice.
So let's just recap for a second. We have a court that can strike down laws, a court that can create new guidelines out of thin air, and a court that can hear cases from any concerned citizen. This creates an immense amount of power, which leads us to the final and most critical question about this entire toolkit.
Because with great power comes some pretty big concerns. Critics raise some very valid fears. There's the ideological fear. Is an unelected judiciary taking over the job of the elected parliament? Then there's the expertise fear. Do judges really have the deep, specialized knowledge to make policy on complex economic or scientific issues? And finally, the management fear. Is the court just overburdening itself with all these issues it can't even effectively enforce?
And all of this really comes back to a fundamental principle of democracy, something famously laid out by Montesquieu, the separation of powers. Each branch, the legislative that makes the laws, the executive that implements them, and the judicial that interprets them, is supposed to have its own distinct role. The whole system is designed for them to check each other, not to do each other's jobs.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. What is the judiciary's true role? Is it meant to be a guardian, just protecting the constitutional rulebook from the sidelines? Or has it evolved into a governor, an active player on the field, directing the course of the nation? The truth most likely lies somewhere in that delicate, ever-shifting balance between the two.